I'm a native Oregonian, born and raised in the suburbs of Northeast Portland. My father was born in Hood River, and my mother grew up in Okayama, Japan, but she immigrated to America when she was 20. I was the youngest of three children, and growing up in the 1960s, we were the only non-white family in our neighborhood. Dad named me after his best friend in high school. However, my mother's command of English, being raised in Japan, was very challenging for her. My name, Larry, was very difficult for her to pronounce. So I often wound up introducing myself, not to embarrass her in front of friends. One day, I had my best friend Joe come over to my house to play, and my mother served milk and cookies. But when my mother said, "Miruku," my friend said, "What'd your mom say? I don't understand it." As a result, I never invited friends over to play at my house for fear of having my mother embarrassed, and also because I wanted to fit in. I knew very little about my Japanese American history as a fifth grader until one day at school. On the playground, my friends David and Tim confronted me. Tim barked out at me. "I saw a TV show last night with my uncle, and the Japs, were attacked, and they were killing Americans. The Japs wound up bombing Hawaii, and they were sent to prison." I didn't know any of this. It was a shock. And then all of a sudden, two other boys came and surrounded me. They cornered me, and they actually, all four boys held up their hands, emulating guns. And then they were going, "Rat-a-tat-tat, rat-a-tat-tat. Let's kill the Japs. Larry's a Jap. Kill the Jap." My fifth grade teacher, Mr. Roberts, was nowhere to be found. He was actually in the teacher's lounge having a cigarette during recess. I peered and saw my best friend Joe in the distance. He had the look of fear on his face. He didn't know what to do. I was begging him with my eyes, like, "Please come and rescue me. Come help me." But instead he turned away to avoid confrontation with the boys. He did not want to deal with the bullies. I had never felt this way before. This was my very first experience with racism. And I knew these kids, these boys I grew up with. Why were they doing this to me? Why? I don't understand. Mr. Roberts came back from his break, and all of a sudden it's like, "Okay, boys, girls, come on back into the class." Everyone ran back in except me. I stood there frozen. I couldn't move. I wanted to cry, but I could not move. My head was bowed down in shock. I have never felt dehumanized in my life. I didn't know how to deal with this feeling. Mr. Roberts came up to me and he said, "Larry, let's go to class. Time to go in." I quietly walked back to my desk, but I don't recall a single thing that happened the rest of the day. I just wanted a safe place to be. I wanted to go home. For the very first time, I felt a sense of isolation. I felt vulnerable. I felt like I didn't belong. I did not feel like how the other kids should have felt. After school, Mom and Dad picked me up from school, and we went to Fred Meyer to buy groceries. I realized that the skies were turning gray, and it started to rain as I peered out my dad's car window. It reflected exactly how I felt. Dad parked the car. He decided to stay in. Mom asked me, "Do you want to go in and look at toys while I shopped?" But I told Mom, no, I declined. Instead, I just stared out at the window, reflecting back on what happened today. The rain came down harder, and tears started to run down my face. "Son, are you okay?" I heard Dad's strong voice, and I realized that he was looking at me from the rearview mirror. He realized that I was crying, so he turned around. "What happened today? Why are you crying?" I explained the incident. "I'm going to go talk to your teacher and principal tomorrow. Who did this to you?" I begged Dad, no, please. I did not want any repercussions to occur. It would be worse if Tim and David wound up getting in trouble. It would have made things worse for me. I told my dad, I'm okay, Dad, really, when I wasn't. I then had to ask Dad, is it true? Did this really happen? I was hoping that it was just a TV show, fiction. But Dad quietly said, yes, it's true. Dad went on to explain the atrocities of war, that when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, it set off a whole chain of events that occurred. That included my grandparents losing their farm. My grandparents immigrated from Japan and settled in Hood River, Oregon. And sadly, during the outbreak of the war, they were incarcerated at Tule Lake, California. My two older uncles wound up serving in the military, and my dad, just being a teen, he and his younger siblings wound up living behind barbed wire in the concentration camp throughout the war years. I then realized, looking back at my parents, why Mom and Dad never talked about such things. I'm sure it was way too painful for them. I talked to my sister the next day. My older sister scolded me. How dare you bring that up to Mom and Dad? Don't you know how traumatic this was to them? I didn't know. Don't you ever ask them again? Don't you ever go there again, is what she told me. I didn't know how to react to any of these feelings. My father was bald, and my dad's younger sister, Aunt Mary, told me that in the camps, when my father was a teen, he was very ill. He had a heavy fever, and my grandmother tried to get help from the medic, but no one came. After a few days, my father woke up and realized that his hair was lost, a permanent scar from the war. And as far as my mother, who was just a young girl growing up in Japan, her older brother and best friend died in bombings. It made me reflect on the persecution that both felt growing up. It led permanent scars in their lives, and I realized why they didn't want to talk about it. It also made me realize all these secrets that they held, and I wanted to know more. It was my Aunt Mary who did disclose some of the things, but I had to ask behind closed doors, not to hurt my parents. When I was in high school, I worked for Bill Nato, a very popular and well-known local businessman. He changed the landscape of Portland, developing Old Town, Montgomery Park, the Galleria, a lot of real estate developments. Bill reminded me of my father because they both were about 5'5", and Bill and my father were on the stocky side. They also both had bald heads. Bill had a little rim of hair and a comb over. That both also wore glasses, and they had very intelligent eyes. But unlike my father, Bill sported a beard that reminded me of one of the Seven Dwarfs, and he also had a very gruff accent. He would say, Larry. And what really impressed me about Bill is that he didn't hide from his ethnicity. Behind his desk, he had the sign from the evacuation. It was the 9066 Declaration, where over 120,000 people of Japanese descent were sent to concentration camps. For a lot of people, it was a reminder of the pain, but in Bill's case, he mentioned that this was a symbol, not only of where he came from, but what he achieved. And he actually embraced that. He did so much. He was not afraid, unlike my parents, to declare his race and to be proud of it and to do something with it. I really admired that. However, working for Bill as a 16-year-old, I was one of 20 young men working in his warehouse. It was dirty, crappy work, making $2.30 an hour, hauling crates, boxes, emptying containers. It was horrible work, but I needed the money to, help pay for school. One day in the warehouse, Bill's manager selected 6 of us. You. And I thought, what a cool project. It beats being hot and sweaty, in a container. Instead, Bill's manager each had us carry heavy buckets of hot tar. We had to walk to one of Bill's flop houses up 5 flights, and it was about 93 degrees outside. It was horrible work. And here we were. The manager told us, keep working, guys. I have to run an errand. And as soon as he left, I turned to my peers and I said, this is ridiculous. I'm not going to do this, not for $2.30 an hour. So I dropped my buckets, I left and took the bus home. The next morning, Bill said, Larry, I need to see you in the office. As I sat in Bill's office waiting to be fired, I looked up at Bill's sign on the evacuation of the Japanese. He quietly then looked at me, and in his voice, Larry, you've always been a good worker, and I appreciate your honesty, because I told him it was horrible work, especially for $2.30 an hour. But what got him is when I said, and you could have a lawsuit if we got injured. He then admitted, you were right. Bill then offered me a job. Larry, instead of doing that, would you work in my office? It was a great job. For $2.30 an hour, I got to run errands to the bank. I did office work. I actually had the opportunity of working along with Bill and his other managers in a clean office. And I was able to observe him with former Mayor Neil Goldschmidt and several other movers and shakers in the city as he discussed reshaping Old Town and other parts of the city. I really admired Bill for that because as a role model, I never had a Japanese American person to look at and to follow. He embraced what happened to him, and that passion drove him to change his world. When I went off to college at the University of Oregon, Bill would also send me letters. He would ask me, do you want to make some extra money for tuition and books during the holidays? And I graciously accepted. I got to know Bill because he asked me, unlike my parents, he asked me what my goals and dreams were. What do you want to be? My mission was to study journalism and advertising and other things. And my mom and dad never asked me those things. I really felt that I had a connection with him. He brought me into his world, and I admired him deeply and greatly. We actually kept in touch on occasion, but I really appreciate the fact that he allowed me to be proud of who I was. He gave me a sense of belonging, and he treated me like a nephew. I would call him Uncle Bill, and I viewed him as I would a favorite uncle. After college, because of my curiosity, I became a member of the Japanese American Citizens League, JCL, a great organization that sponsored public events that talked about the civil rights of Japanese Americans. It also brought me in touch with people, much like my parents, who had suffered their lives through internment camps. However, unlike mom and dad, they openly talked about what they went through. I admired their strength, their courage, the fact that they were defying what happened rather than shrinking away from that history. They embraced it. They told stories so that people would never, ever forget. That gave me a sense of community. That gave me strength also. I admired them so greatly, and I was very blessed to have had that opportunity. And that curiosity led me to do more within my community. I was actually on the launch committee for the Japanese American Historical Plaza in 1990, where we all get to enjoy the beautiful spring blossoms of the cherry trees on Nato Parkway. It also allowed me to hear stories about those in the internment camps through poetry and statements, things that my parents never were able to share with me. So I'm very proud, I'm very honored to be Japanese American. I'm very proud to have been involved with all these beautiful people. It gave me a sense of belonging, a sense of who I am. And for that, I'm so proud, I'm so grateful. We all need more of that now than ever. Thank you.